it's just so sneaky, and in the way that it kind of creeps up on you. Yeah, it's like you're young and you have these ideas, and as a 9, you're chill, you just want to surf all day, or like I told my wife first married, I could just live in a trailer in the desert. I would be happy as fly on shit or something. But you start having responsibilities, and family and society puts pressures, and you just kind of get into this groove um, that you're expected to do. Once you kind of get in that groove, it's so hard to see it. You're just so numb at that point that you just you lose connection with anything you may have wanted to do or be in the past, or just being a function.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I'm Josh Levine, your host. Today, my guest is a 9-wing 8 named Charles Thompson. Before we get into the interview, I want to give a couple plugs. First is for the new Enneagram school that John Lekovich and I have started, the enneagramschool.com. It's going to be a place where you can meet other people who are devoted to sincere inner work and also learning fresh new insights about the Enneagram along the way. And also the other plug is for the Enneagram Expressions Library, which is a visual interactive display of the Enneagrammer celebrity database, and also a way to explore and discover poetry and art and music by Enneagram type, especially useful if you're an Enneagram teacher and you want some of those resources for retreats and things like that. Also, check out a couple of the fictional characters that we've typed as well. And finally, if you are a frequent listener of some of these interviews, I would super appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to this YouTube video, or if you're listening to this podcast, then please write a review. Some of those things are really, really helpful for people like me. All right, let's talk about the interview. Charles Thompson is a social self-pres, 9-wing 8, 963 trifix, and man, this conversation was very, very interesting from a conversational point of view. Just exploring the differences between my conversational style, which has a 3 competence orientation, and his 9-wing 8 kind of meandering, ball rolling down a hill conversational style, which we explore together in real time. It also is a really good exploration of what the 8-wing does to the core 9. So you got like a rejection object relation wing on an attachment core. And finally, I just want to say that Charles, we get into this in the interview, but Charles has been married for about 20 years or more, actually, for more than half his life. He has 4 kids, and he has started a number of different projects, including currently an internet marketing and web agency. And in his own self-description,
I love to cook, love to garden, like off-grid projects. Like I'm like one of those 9s they talk about that has like 50 different projects going, and they're all half done all over the place.
And one of the things I want to point out is that Charles self-admittedly was numb and fulfilling functions and going on autopilot through life for a period of about 20 years. And recently he had a resensitization and reawakening and kind of came back to himself. So explore that as well in the interview. So please enjoy this interview with my new friend, Charles. So why don't we begin with, I'd love for you to share your Enneagram origin story.
Well, I got into psychology like 20-something years ago, got a degree in it. Didn't use it for anything professionally, but so I've always been interested in that, especially personality and abnormal psychology, things that cause people to maybe go a different direction than what society expects and things like that. But, mainly personality is where my real interests lie. About 6 years ago, I was really getting back into MBTI again. If you're interested in that, I'm an INFP in that realm. But really getting into that with my oldest daughter. So we were nerding out on that for a while. And I discovered Enneagram. I forget who I discovered first, maybe Chris Hears or something. I really enjoyed, Risa Hudson and Chris Hears and some of those other guys in that realm over the years, and just was consuming all the content I could on this stuff for years now. Came across the Big Hormone Enneagram podcast, really loved that. They're a little on a negative in comparison to other folks, but I like to view all sides. I'm not scared of a little negativity too. So that was really fun. I really enjoy their content as well. Yeah, I guess the origin story pertaining to me personally, it was really difficult to figure out my instincts. The type, the 9, I almost immediately knew that, but figuring out the instincts, and then the trifix. So I contacted David Gray and it was booklet and some different things in that to figure it out because I had no idea. I mean, I guess it's what they call Bermuda type or whatever. I was going around in circles, trying to figure out,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's
So
kind of it.
so you reached out to me about doing this interview a few months ago,
Mm,
and you contextualized your reaching out by saying that you think you have a good perspective on what it's like to be a 9 who has been married to someone for a long time, like a family man. You've got
mm,
4 kids, you're married, and and especially the Bermuda 9
yeah,
sense of, as in your words, meandering forward through life, and
mm,
what it's like to kind of go on autopilot and be fulfilling roles as opposed to being really anchored sort of within yourself. And
yeah,
what really struck me about our first conversation, actually, a lot struck me. First of all, the immediate visual impact of you and your tattoos is striking. And
oh yeah,
that's a whole thing that I want to get to that in a minute, but
mm,
I want to set it up because I think that the context is really important, because it sounds to me like you had this really long period of life where you basically were on a form of autopilot, and then
right.
something happened recently where you, I think it was triggered by you going to the doctor, right, and you discovering that you had an issue with your blood pressure.
At the request of my
And
wife, yes, I probably never would have done it. Although,
what's that? Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So something happened recently for you, and I'd love for you to share the journey of it. But you basically realized that you've not really been with yourself or something like that, and you came back to yourself.
Mm,
And one thing you said was like, I hadn't cried in 20 years, and you're crying now.
mm,
And some other things are,
right.
it's almost like you're resensitizing from a state of somewhat numbness
Yes,
to now back to feeling more things at all, like feeling period.
right.
So
Yeah. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, 20 years sounds crazy, right? I mean, there was a couple times, family members died or pets. I think I mentioned that to you, where I teared up and cried. Those
Mhm.
moments got me even during that time. But yeah, over the
Mhm.
over the last, so I've been married for 23 years. My wife is wonderful, beautiful. She's a one, um,
Mhm.
and so she's kept me on track in a lot of ways. But there's a way that I'm always like fighting against my function, even though I'm doing it, if that makes sense. And my function being like, working, providing, doing what you need to do when you need to do it for people, especially from a social perspective. But I feel like sometimes we live in this self-pres hell of a world where everything is about money, and the capitalist dystopia, whatever that we live in
Mhm.
here, and
Mhm.
so that
Sure.
has always just kind of made it to where you have to desensitize to some degree. Everybody does. It's not just me. As you grow
Yep.
up, you become an adult. But me specifically, yeah, aside from a couple of times, like a really close family member or pet dying, I did not cry. Oh, probably for 20 something years. I remember a couple times when I first got married and fighting a little bit here and there. Nothing crazy, but yeah, I cried a little bit then. But then that was like 6 months, a year in. After that, things kind of mellowed out, chilled out. We got into our, like you said, got into kind of autopilot. And from there, it was just building companies, providing for the family, figuring out how I can, hustle, do whatever I've got to do to get by, which does not lend
Mhm.
itself to much introspection, which is what I used to like to do and be involved in when I was younger. Hence the psychology interest and that sort of thing. Being a 9 specifically, if we want to look at it from that angle, I mean, obviously 9s are known for desensitizing themselves in various ways. Work being one of them. You could call me a workaholic. That might be an
Okay.
accurate descriptor. There's been times where you can
Mhm.
call me an alcoholic. That might be an accurate descriptor, in this
Mhm.
society.
Mhm.
Just various ways to numb. I really enjoyed the other 9 fellow you had on a while back, where he was talking about the numbing and the way it feels,
Jamie. Yeah.
especially when you're
Mhm.
numbing on like things like Netflix or YouTube, which I can go down the YouTube rabbit hole for hours if I let myself. I don't
Mhm.
usually until the night time or evening, because I know how I can be. It's just, yeah, it's just going to keep the cycle going. It just never ends. I
Right.
won't get
Right.
anything done. But
So
I could keep going on this
what
forever.
happened?
So yeah, go ahead and interrupt me. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's funny. One of the things that we talked about when we first met was that you have this not just meandering forward way of life, but also conversationally.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're like a
Hmm.
conversational
Yeah. And don't be
ball
afraid to
rolling
interrupt
down a
me. That
hill,
was
you
one
know?
difference. Yeah. Between me and the
Uh huh.
last fellows, I don't mind being interrupted, and I will interrupt sometimes. That's a little different for me on that
Okay.
because I know I meander. You know. Yeah.
Actually, that's a good one wing versus eight wing distinction right there. That's, yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
So
He's a very awesome
the,
guy.
and
Beautiful Bermuda night. Yeah.
yeah, he's amazing. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. James is a good friend. So the, oh yeah, I wanted to ask you to clarify what has happened for you recently, and was there a moment in time, or was it a sort of murkier period of time in which you found yourself resensitizing? And I believe there was a moment where you
Mm,
cried, and then
yeah.
tell us about the doctor's office, or just like what have been the circumstances that
Yeah.
you've kind of come back to life?
Yeah. So the last few years have been a little difficult. I mean, I'm moving in the middle age, which is one reason I thought it might be beneficial to get someone a little older than 9 on here to kind of talk about what it's been like, and
Yeah.
maybe moving into more an assertive role over the years and things that nines aren't typically known for, in my
Mhm.
experience with that. But what really struck me with your interviews was the one you did with Alex, the one. It was just beautiful, and it really helped me understand how ones are a body type, even though all the literature out there seems to describe them as head types. You know what I mean? Or heart types, something in that range.
Uh-huh.
And but
Yeah.
ones are not abnegating their gut reaction. They're emotionally justifying it. They are, and they're abnegating their logical center typically to do that, right? Like that's the difference, Anyway, I
Okay.
really enjoyed
Yeah.
that interview, and that's was like I got to reach out to this guy because it's beautiful. We should talk about cat paw and stuff. But here I am meandering. Let's go back to what was the question? I'm sorry.
I was just gonna point that out. Yeah, no, I
I'm
just
still
love that
thinking
when I ask
about
you this
the
question. It's
why I introduced myself to you and my origin story. I'm still back there. Sorry, I'm a little slow.
that was such a great moment. I just love that because that happened with David too, where I'd ask a question and it would almost like dissolve in his consciousness, and
And
then
come
I'd
back.
remind him what the
It's
question was
funny.
and be like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay,
Wow,
like let's say okay, let me answer that question. So
it's got
so
to
the question is,
stir
can you
around
tell
the
us?
gut.
Yes, yeah. Can you tell us about what has happened for you recently around your kind of
Yeah,
resensitization and yeah.
yeah. So getting older, middle age is why I can from the beginning. Um, Daughters moving out, both of them, moved off out of city to go to college. You had a great time,
Okay.
but you start to question things and realize, oh, what is my function in this environment? What am I doing? And I had the Enneagram to help me and to play with this, but at the same time, health issues were sneaking up on me that I wasn't aware of. High blood pressure, extremely high, to the point where you're getting, brain fog and depression and stuff like that that I wasn't aware of. I just knew, I knew what depression was clinically based on my, psychological studies. I knew something was a little weird. Um, it wasn't like extreme or anything, but there's a way to it was even worse than just being a 9. There was a way that I was having difficulty feeling anything, and then feelings would start to flood in, right? Like, and that's kind of one of the definitions of depression. Anyway, and I know why. I'm like, my life is fine. Yeah, the kids are getting older. I'm getting a little, uglier, older, whatever. But it's like nothing crazy. But so the funny story is, I guess it's called sciatica. I just woke up one morning, my ass was hurting extremely. Couldn't even put on my own socks or shoes, and I hate being dependent on other people.
Sure.
And so my wife would have to drive me around, help me put on my socks a bit. So she'd been pushing me for a while to go to the doctor anyway, because I've been forever. But then this specifically, okay, that was it. I gotta go. Went there, and she wasn't even worried about that. And by the time I got to the doctor's appointment, it was weeks later. My ass wasn't hurting anymore. So, um, but the blood pressure was 180 something over whatever. I remember the second number, but
Okay.
it's an extreme range. And she was concerned about that, so she got me medication, started on my diet, and I love salt, tons of it. I could eat ramen noodles and stuff all day. But I've been doing that for years, and obviously it's not good for me. So yeah, it got me on the medication, and it was in a way like a fog had been lifted in that regard. So I guess here there's two parts to this. feeling emotions again, but yet they were flooding out in kind of almost random ways, watching a movie and just like bawling or something. Um, and then
Yeah.
when I hadn't, identified really with a character in 20 years in a movie, you know what I mean? I must have just been watching YouTube BS or something. And now I'm getting into stories and I'm starting to, get in touch with stuff again. Just because of that blood pressure issue, really, in a way. Um, but then taking the medication out lifted the fog from it. And now it's like more like, um, I can tear up in a movie or not, or I can. It's so strange that it's all related to the body and physical health that I've been pushing down or blocking my whole life, which
Mm-hmm.
in a way is part of what a nine does. But I guess I just didn't see it. Like, I mean, it's just so close to you, just don't know it, you know. Um, so yeah,
Right.
I don't know where you want me to go with that. I keep going all kind of directions with that, but
One thing that
yeah,
one thing that was
it's just
amazing about what you just said, the not relating to a character in a movie for 20 years is quite amazing. And
mm,
um, off the top of my head, I can't think of
not like
necessarily a
that.
nine character, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it just strikes me
Mm,
that there's some way that you, in a sense, had forgotten yourself or weren't holding yourself,
mm,
didn't really have a clearly constellated self that you were holding in your consciousness that could be compared to a character. Because I'm
right.
sure 20 years of watching movies that there were
It's just so fluid,
characters that at least
right?
that yeah parts of them at least you might have related to. Anyway, I just found that interesting. Yeah.
There's a way I think
So
that
yeah,
nines
go
from
ahead.
physical perspective can be very pulled back and withdrawn, and shut down and
Hmm.
not presenting much. Never felt like that on the inside, really, that much. Even when I was on autopilot, I still felt like I felt more than I showed, or something like that, if that makes sense. So it's just really difficult to see, but
Yeah.
yet the physical manifestation wasn't there. The
Yeah.
willingness
Yeah.
to kind of pull your heart out or whatever. To have it be there, like tear up in a movie, and even now, like I'm in a movie theater or something, I'm like, holding the tears and just since nobody's looking, kind of swiping away real quick. So
Sure.
it's like there's a
Yeah.
way that even
uh,
it's still difficult to present that too much publicly. But
I can relate to that. Yeah. um well, okay, so something I want to reflect back something you said to me in our last call, which is that you had decades of putting yourself aside, that you had become a function, dad and husband specifically, and I imagine also there's a work analog. Um, you have to
mm-hmm.
fit those roles, and it's not just something that you thought about. You said you just fit into the groove.
Yep, going with the flow,
Yeah,
right? Whatever
yeah,
that is,
yeah,
and it doesn't necessarily mean like some people think with nines of not putting yourself in positions of authority. You have to. I mean, sometimes to really provide out there these days, you kind of
mhm,
have to be assertive and put yourself in some sort of authority role, especially with as many kids as I have for, right? It's very difficult to provide for them these days without, moving beyond the standard 9 to 5s, right? So you have to do
mhm.
something. So, um, yeah, go back to what you're saying. I'm going off on a thing again. But,
Just I was referencing your description of yourself for however like the last 20 years or
right.
something, of fitting into the groove and
Yeah.
fulfilling certain functions and kind of deleting
Yeah.
yourself. Um,
Here I am justifying it,
and
but that's what happened, right? Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah. I guess I was trying to present the social context or something justifying. I'm like, well, this is why I had to do it, and blah blah. But yeah,
Yeah.
it almost is insidious the right word? It's just so sneaky, and in the way that
Oh,
it
I
kind
love
of
that sneaky.
creeps up
Yeah.
on you. Yeah, it's like you're young and
Hmm.
you have these ideas, and as a nine, you're chill. You just want to surf all day, or like that's when my wife first got married. I could just live in a trailer in the desert. I would be happy as fly on shit or something. But
Uh,
you start responsibilities, and family and society puts pressures, and I don't know if it's a Bermuda thing. I think it is, because the way I understand, threes and sixes, they could do a lot of this too. You just kind of get into this groove, um, that you're expected to do in a way, right? And whatever that is, and it shows up maybe in different ways for those different types. But once you kind of get in that groove, it's so hard to see it, especially without that heart piece. If your heart lasts, or if you're not in touch with your heart, or you've let your health go, maybe like me near the end of the last 20 years, where you're just so numb at that point, um, that you just, you lose connection with anything you may have wanted to do or be, in the past. Or just being a function, I guess is kind of what I meant by that. And then you start to see
Wow.
yourself, you start to project on other people. This is where it can get ugly too, or a little
Go on.
resentful, maybe not so ugly, but I can get frustrated with people, at this point in my life, and I can show it, and stuff like that, because I feel like, and this is me, this is not them, but I feel like they're always wanting stuff from me, always needing stuff from me, physically,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, just space wise, whatever. And I don't need anything from them, right? That's how I see my ego, right? That's kind of when you get
Okay.
into
Sure.
that point, when you get into that groove of that capitalist dystopia, like I'm the guy and everybody else, you're coming to me, and you can start to go with family and people you really care about, right? And that's where it gets, or it doesn't cultivate proper relationships. It's almost like the way I've heard the BHE podcast talk about the rejection types, how they're cutting certain things off and the leverage and this kind of stuff. And with the 8-wing, I can definitely see a lot of 8 there. I know ultimately it's not quite from the same. I'm not pushing into the world by default. I am retracting from it, but I'm creating this boundary, kind of like is what I'm talking about. The rejection type does, where it's like you don't cross
Yeah.
this. Like
And
you
that
don't.
piece of
This is my space. I don't
not
cross your
relying on
space. I'm
anyone.
perfectly fine with you
Yeah.
doing whatever the fuck you want over there. You do whatever, but leave me alone. Let me do my thing over here. You know what I mean? So there's this way you start to get
Right. Right.
resentful of even people you love and kids that do need you and should need you. Where you start to realize this isn't healthy. Something's wrong. You know, pull back.
Right.
When you can see
Yeah.
enough.
This is I love this point about the resentment that builds up when you feel
Mm,
like someone is asserting some obligation on you or something like that. Like you have to
mm-hmm,
do something, or someone there's and whether it's, your partner, or your kids, or your work, or whatever, but
mm-hmm,
there's some way that if there's something that is pulling on your energy in a way that you in a certain sense
mm-hmm,
haven't fully consented to or brought yourself
right.
to say a full yes to, then it feels like an obligation or a form of inner pressure that the 9 throws a very quiet rebellion against. And
Yeah.
or maybe not so quiet in your sense, but there's a way
Well,
that
until they don't, yeah, until something builds up, and it might even just be a narrative you're telling yourself. It might not even be realistic, but you've been not communicating it properly and
Mhm.
reserving your feelings on it for so long, it can come out in pretty awkward ways sometimes. Yeah.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Yeah. And man, I wanted to just rewind a sec because they use some really beautiful and stark language to describe the the numbed state that you were in, where it was basically like one thing that is really striking to me about numbness itself is that just by definition of what it is, you don't notice it. That's what
Yeah.
being numb is. It's the
Yeah.
inability to actually notice your sensory reality. And
For a
so,
really good example, oh, go
yeah.
ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
No, actually, I would love an
For
example. Go ahead.
yeah, a really good physical example of this is butterflies. In the stomach nervousness.
Uh huh.
Because when I was younger, I got those a lot, like a lot. It felt like everything was kind of, and
Sure.
really hated public speaking, almost to the point where you could call it a public speaking disorder in a way, where I skipped classes on those days. I don't know if you know the definition of disorders in economic psychology, but essentially where it's affecting your goals in your life, then
Okay.
it's now a disorder.
Hmm.
So skipping out of classes, getting lower grades, which I hated, not the best, right? So it was to that point. But as I got older, like in realizing it, recently, maybe through the Enneagram, I'm like, what is being in your gut, being back in touch with your body even mean, right? Over the past few years, trying to figure that out,
Yeah.
I realized I haven't had butterflies in like that same amount of time. 20 something years, or forever anyway, whatever time it was. It's just been so long, I forgot what it even was like. And I'm getting those again, but I don't look at them the same it's almost
Uh
like,
huh.
I think I've heard it talked about before with like some people, that's excitement to some people. It revs them up and they love it. And other types that are seeing it maybe in negative light, like I did, where no, I have to control, I have to sit down. Nobody can see my face. show any kind of fear or anything. I have to keep this in. Learning so long to tamp it down that it was fully tamped, I guess, right in a way. But now feeling it again and realizing that's not so bad. It's okay to be, show a little inflection and stuff like that. So yeah.
Right. You know, the the butterfly thing is such a cool example because it's a way that, when you were a kid, you experienced your your sensory reaction to the world, and that is a function of the body center to actually experience your
Right.
sensory response to something. And the it's just such a cool example because both 9 and 8 are numbing themselves in certain ways,
Mm.
and just the absence of those butterflies from your life is such a cool illustration of numbness, that it's
Yeah.
like you numbed somehow unconsciously your response to the world and the world's impact on you. And it's very interesting to me that they're coming back now. I find that so fascinating.
Yeah. And the other fellow talked about the numbness almost being like a buzz in the background that overrides everything. And I definitely
Hmm.
do agree with that. I was like, wow, that's so on point in so many ways. There is another
Yeah.
kind of numbness though that I experienced too. That's a little more dead than that even. And I'm not talking about the autopilot stuff we were talking about before, because I was very active. I was interactive. I was out there doing, but like I said, just as a function,
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
like you would think of a
Yeah.
workaholic or something, just kind of like, but there's a
Yeah.
way that that the numbness can just be this dark hole where there just really isn't anything. There's no feelers out in the world like I would normally be as a nine pre-receptive. It's a way to protect yourself, I guess. But when it gets to that extreme point, it's no longer protective. You're just unaware.
Yeah.
You're in your stories in your place maybe, but sometimes you're just on the autopilot. You're just, or if you're laying in bed and you're just I used to think about it this way, like, oh, I have almost this superpower, something I can just shut my mind off, like, and just go to sleep, right? There was
Hmm.
times in my life where
Hmm.
I couldn't, or it was racing, work or stress or something. But so wait, I could just shut it off, go to sleep. Didn't need YouTube, didn't need anything, um, almost like that. But there's a way that you get closer connected to that shutting off. Then it becomes too easy. Then it's just like almost like you're zombie or something. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know what other people would have experienced from me on the outside, but that's kind of what you feel on the inside. It's just
That's
like,
actually exactly what I was just wondering is what do you
yeah,
think I would have known? Like if I had interacted with you,
mm,
what would I have seen in that moment?
probably me just doing something, some project or something, going through the motions. If you try to
Mm.
talk to me, I would be very cut off, not responding properly. And I still have a tendency to do that sometimes,
Okay.
where it's almost like that boundary just doesn't go away, even if my heart might want it to, like, kids or something, or I've really been worrying about them or thinking about them, but yet now I've tamped things down because I am worrying about them. But now they're coming to me, wanting to talk to me, and I'm not even responding to it properly because I'm so okay. So this is kind of, maybe this is one way to put it. There,
Okay.
there's a way that, and this may be all nights, I think, but me specifically, where feelings, even good feelings, other people's feelings and good feelings, can be too much for me, right? And scary in a way, if you want to call it scary. I guess it's more just like invasive, maybe scary, somewhere in that range. It's just too much. Um, so,
Yeah.
but here's the thing: like, too much is scary and whatever, but too little, I can't function, right? So there has to be this medium ground, right, where I can be present and responsive to those feelings, to my heart, to people around me, their heart or their needs or whatever, logically, without feeling like this is too much and I'm starting to get, like, oversensitized, too much sensory input or whatever you call it, but not allowing myself to drop into that hole, where I'm unresponsive almost or overly stoic or something or whatever. I don't know how you put that really. I don't really see myself in the
Yeah.
outside, but you know, um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like there is this equilibrium that a nine is looking for, I guess. So I guess it is a nine thing, maybe. There's this equilibrium that you're looking, all types I think are looking for some sort of equilibrium, but as a 9, it's that it's almost related to not really sensory, but just the entire world. you know, just everything. Being either too much or too little. Too much is stressful, and then you start to drop into that pit of too little, and you have to bring yourself back up. And it's just become more easy for me in this regard over the years, or recent years, to bring myself back up by trying to be more in touch with my heart. I guess, if that makes sense. I think the heart kind of is that middle ground. And I've heard people talk about like your gut's down here, your head's down here, your heart's kind of. There is kind of that way. It's funny that kind of works. As an example, that there's kind of a way the heart can pull you back up out of that hole or that gut. And the head. The heart can kind of bring you back down out of the head when you're being too. Oh, I really like the spot in Amidst, by the way. First time I heard that was a few years ago. This guy Tim, he taught about it, and it was really excellent. I've loved your talks on that recently too, about that stuff. But you
Cool.
can be
Thanks.
too orange, right? Too much in the orange, so the heart brings you back down to. Anyway, the heart, I think, is what kind of drives the world in the way that it is, kind of in the middle in that regard. Anyway, so I don't want to get into theory or anything, but
there's something really interesting about what you're saying. This too much, too little thing, and it's bringing up. It does strike me that there's something really true about 9 seeking a kind of Goldilocks perfect little sliver of like the world is impacting me and affecting me like just enough, and I'm bringing myself out just enough, and there's this kind of perfect meeting point, but it is a kind of teetering thin edge of a blade or something like that, or like a unstable equilibrium.
You see that in the one wings too. That frustration. Yeah, they're kind of doing that fluctuation thing a little more in real time.
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking for you,
the 8s, it's more like a drop and a pull.
Like the way that I'm conceiving of 8, 9, and 1 these days is that 9 and 8 are both types that their strategies are to numb themselves. 9 kind of numbs itself in response to the world. 8 numbs itself preemptively so the world can't get to it. And then the 1 is sort of an inability to numb itself. And that's what creates all the frustration, because anything that gets in feels like an irritant or a contaminant. But what's really striking to me about you is that as a 9 with an 8 wing without that frustration affect, there's it's kind of like a double numbness that you can get into. And that's that feeling of living death that you sit in mud. Yeah. Right.
There's a lot of things you can use for it.
Yeah.
As a social type, I'm so hyper aware of it, I think, too. I mean, there's a sense that the self-pres is a little more in tune with this, right? And it would be more drastic if I was self-pres first. My wife is self-pres first, so we kind of balance each other out in a lot of ways. But with the social, there's a way that I'm seeing it in real time, but like I'm in this hole, unable to reach out that hole and interact with that person properly or something. When I'm in that stress mood, I would call that stress mood.
Yeah.
That's the response to that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing social in for a second, and then talking about like the last couple of years for you of being on the other side of having started to resensitize yourself and unnumb yourself. And I want to talk about your tattoos. Are you want to go there?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that you just recently started getting them.
Well, I got my first one when I was 15. I started getting ones that are a little more unsocially acceptable in places, I guess.
There you
to
go.
Some people, I know these days it's gotten a little more murky in that regard, but like I still tell my kids, like I let them all get their first one when they're 16. I'd pay for it. I thought it was a great way to like kind of. They all seem to want them to get them into it, and like, sure. I'm just gonna help guide you so you're not getting like lips on your ass or something. But let's, something like that. But so there's this way that it's got more acceptable. I still tell them don't put on your hand or neck or something yet, or face. You still need to get out in the work world. Who knows what you're going to need in that regard socially. I'm always worried about that, right? So, but I took myself to this point where it wasn't as important anymore. I'm done with the corporate world. We can do a lot of stuff with clients remotely. I don't have to have camera on all the time where people might be worried or judge me. That
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. Really, why I've been getting them more and more and more visible, and some have had in some relatively visible places, like these bands here. That's my four kids.
Yeah.
Each one represents one of them. The little animal on it.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
Funny butterfly with a hawk. Anyway, so I've had these for started these like 15, 16 years ago and stuff. But yeah, the neck has been maybe the past 4 or 5 years.
Okay. Yeah.
This hand one is actually just this. This is my wife and I's anniversary. Most stuff like is related
And
to family or friends. I've got the
just,
Scottish crest here. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to say, for people who are not watching the video, listen to the podcast, can you just
Okay.
describe,
Yeah.
especially like you have Harriet Tubman on one
Oh
side
yeah,
of your
that's over
face,
here. Uh huh.
right?
Yeah, I got that in
Yeah.
2019, and then
Yeah.
actually just did this kind of like halo thing I thought was cool, like around it.
So
What
it's
was
literally
originally?
like up your neck
Yeah.
and up into your cheek, like the face of
Mm-hmm.
Harriet Tubman is on your
Yeah.
face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what really struck me about that, other than just it is striking, period, but that you said you live in a somewhat conservative neighborhood, and
Oh
this
right. Right.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
right, and
You
that
gotta deal with the
you,
Trump flags and the not to get political or
yeah,
something here, but you gotta do that
sure,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Big trucks.
yeah,
I
I'm not
drive a
trying to
big
get
truck, but
political.
I don't do the Trump thing. But yeah. Yeah.
What I'm point, yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah.
just
Go
pointing
ahead.
to your willingness to locate yourself
Mm.
about something that you care about in a
Right.
context where it wouldn't necessarily fly socially. And
Not,
being a
and I
social
wouldn't have done
type,
that 20
being a
years
social
ago. So.
nine, there you
Hmm.
go. Yeah, yeah. And I find that
Yeah.
so interesting. I mean, it's just a very clear point of evidence around the transformation you're undergoing. And
And
yeah, go ahead.
there's a way that this kind of stuff is signaling in a way. Like here's the Scottish clan thing. Here's Harry Tubman. One of the heroes of the Underground Railroad, and how awesome that is. And I really value freedom and stuff.
Yep.
8, 9, that range. Obviously, that's huge for me. Autonomy. Do you do your thing? I'll do
Hmm.
mine, but I'm not going to impose anyway. So yeah, I love that. The other thing is too is learning to have people that you can. They don't have to be perfect. That you can look up to. I've always told the kids over the years, no one should be your hero. No one's worthy of that in a way. People are just people, and we're all just a bunch of dumb monkeys in a sense, just trying to figure shit out, right? That was my not so nice perspective for the last 20 years.
Okay.
But now I'm like, heroes are fine, and I've got this, and I'm tying more things into the family and history and stuff like that. And my anniversary of my wife on my hand, the
Hmm.
roses, roses were at our wedding, and there's two of them. And describe it for folks not looking, but yeah, there's a sense now that I just don't care as much. If someone doesn't agree with me, that's fine. I'm not
Hmm.
as like sensitive to it or something, and I don't have to be. I'm getting older, crustier. I might be one of those old guys, when I'm 70, just going around and saying what the hell I want. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm starting down that path, the old crusty guy path.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if this is growth necessarily, but this definitely feels good. Something I haven't,
Hmm.
that hasn't been easy, over the years, is social self-pres and that sort of thing. Because there's a way that self-pres ties into that too, right? Like I use self-pres often to provide my social standing and be a provider and stuff, and then it goes back and forth. But
Well,
yeah,
it
yeah, go
certainly
ahead, man.
feels like a story of individuation, and
Right.
basically, saying I care about this,
Yeah,
and then actually marking yourself on your body with
it's very permanent.
a
Yeah.
stamp of caring. Yeah, yeah.
In all honesty, though, and I do try to find something that I like, or that I think could be important, or not just some meaningless, frivolous tattoo. Um,
Hmm.
um, like maybe some of the first ones I got when I was younger or something. But I, it's very, very physical for me. There's a reason I like to go relatively often, or I get to go on my birthday or Christmas or something. A
Hmm.
gift to myself, sort of thing. Or my wife lets me get. We've been married so long, we really don't buy each other's presents very often. Let's give each other sentimental things sometimes. But so that's kind of my thing. Hey, yeah, go do that for your birthday. But the pain itself is almost like a bringing me back to reality, um, or back up
Ah,
out of that
fascinating.
hole. Back up
Yeah.
out of that hole, I guess is a better way to describe it. Not so much down, back up.
Hmm.
Um, and not like the mind numbing pains. Like I jacked up my neck falling off a mechanical bull, and I get these really serious headaches. Not that kind of stuff where it puts you into this pain hole, but that, the
Hmm.
prickly kind of like back to reality sort of pain. Another thing that might
Hmm.
be graphic for me, but I love the dental hygiene pics. I like this kind of stuff, the
Sure.
tattoos.
Yeah.
It just, there's a way that that pain just is good somehow. Really, it kind of pulls you back
Uh-huh.
up. And so it makes me more aware of my feelings, of my presence, my physical body in this world too.
Yeah.
And that's really why I've been getting more and more these days. It's not like I have a need to like show everybody who I am too much. I mean, there is a little bit of that, but it's more that I think.
That is
Just
such an interesting framing.
yeah,
That is, I mean, it's about it's about the sensory experience of getting the tattoo that feels
you
like it
just feel good. You got
calls you back to
adrenaline.
life.
You're back to
Feels
life that day. Yeah, it's just something about it. Without resorting to some sort of drugs or something like I've done in my teen years. Yep.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to get too dark or whatever, but I
Yeah.
find like so people who go really numb or dissociate sometimes will cut themselves, and it seems like
Mm,
a
mm,
much more extreme version of it's like to feel something,
yeah.
you know.
Right.
And if we let's put this on a spectrum of health, like that seems to me to
Mm.
be a self-destructive kind of unhealthy behavior that would be useful to not do.
I'm sure it
But
could
it is
be.
serving a
I wouldn't put a
similar
lot of judgment on that,
function.
but yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much judgment on that because I've known some people that
Yeah.
have done that. I've actually never done that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess this could be similar, right? Yeah, absolutely. This is a little more social. I'm out there, I'm interacting with an artist. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it feels
whatever.
it feels like
Yeah,
a at the very
yeah,
least in the same ballpark. It's serving a similar function.
yeah, yeah. It is. You're
That
right.
it's
Yeah,
a it is a
that's
thing
crazy. I
that
didn't think
makes you
about that
feel.
before.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, it is. Well, something else I do that's a little less drastic and less dark is I've been
Uh-huh.
trying to use my sense of smell a little more. That's something that I think
Okay.
humans are like, of all our senses, that's probably our least. Most of us are the least tied to. I think in a lot
Hmm.
of ways, and it's
Hmm.
funny because and this is 20-something-year-old psychology, but I remember learning that the sense of smell is the most closely tied to the emotional processing portions of your brain. Okay, it has a really
Right into
close tie
memory.
to that.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
why some people really hate a smell or really love a smell. But the problem is, it's almost like a learned response, just like that learned
Hmm.
response to the butterflies in the stomach, whether it's
Yeah.
negative or not. So they've never found a universal smell to disperse crowds because even corpses and skunks, some people like that smell. Like I like the smell of skunks,
Yeah.
reminds me of road trips in the summer as a kid. But
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um, but I've been learning to be more in touch with that sensory that's been kind of ignored for so long. Unless something like was
Very cool.
blasting it, like someone's perfume in the stall next door, or something actually did die in the bathroom. But yeah, so just smelling, produce versus just feeling it and looking at it to judge if I want to buy it. Or, I used to joke that my wife and daughters were sniffers because I like to sniff candles stuff. Just smelling that, allowing myself
Uh-huh.
to, oh, what is that? Trying to understand what that smell is versus just like ignoring it. Oh, there's a smell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very similar in that regard to me. It's a sensory thing, um, in a way. It makes me feel more in touch with reality. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Can you talk about your relationship with anger?
yeah. Ooh, well, it's something that, so frustration I actually look at as more undesirable. So I don't like to use to say, oh, I don't like that or this, or be frustrated in real time because I feel like that's an edge that I have to deal with other people quite often. It's that kind of frustration edge. It just seems like to me, and this is not to be too judgmental, but it just seems like sometimes people are overly frustrated externally or just kind of shitting their feelings and emotions all over me and all over the world. So that I have an issue with sometimes. Anger itself, like if I use it, is definitely more of a tool for me. But then again, that is something I am in my mid 40s. I've had to be, I think I am kind of assertive in general, but I've had to learn to even evolve that even more over the years. That I do use it and I don't have a really bad relationship with it day to day. I'm mostly not presenting a lot of anger, but I'm presenting assertiveness. And so, yeah, I guess it's kind of difficult for me to differentiate those two sometimes. Yeah, that is kind of a nine thing, right? Like what's being assertive and what's being angry. Because sometimes it takes that anger in there to wake you up to become assertive, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about too, back again, not to circle back or tie everything together, but where sometimes things feel like too much, right? And you got to watch it, you got to bring it back down. So I can see myself in real time sometimes getting a little too assertive and pulling it back in, versus like what a nine, a more immature 9 or somebody might do, where they're just kind of like, bam, with the full force of it, and then they leave or something. The full force
Oh
of that
yeah.
anger, you know what I mean, coming out
Oh,
all
I
at
have a
once, and then they're
yeah.
gone because now they feel stupid, they feel whatever. It's like, see it, you know. But, yeah. So it's more healthy, I guess. Not to say that I'm growing and everything's roses, but it's more like I can show it, be assertive, but not go overboard. Go back.
Uh-huh. Man, I have a
Yeah.
9-wing 8 that's very close to me, whose identity I won't reveal, but that tracks, man. That is,
Yeah.
like that's really funny. The
it,
brunt
the
force
funny
of
thing
the
is,
8-wing
yeah,
only comes out occasionally and sometimes
yeah.
seemingly out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I'm just,
I
like
didn't
what?
do that.
Who, me?
Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of like too. It's like a lot of people, and this is the 9 wing 8's fault to some degree. I'm not your friend, but a 9 wing 8, it's probably their fault,
Mhm,
mine specifically.
mhm.
Um, where you're not giving people a lot to go, you're not giving them that frustration, right?
Right.
That most other types have it, at least in their wing, or that are giving that kind of thing. Like, no, I don't like that. You're not usually giving that. Like, you're usually giving like, no, whatever, it doesn't matter. Um, and so
Sure.
people take you at
Sure.
your word, and then next thing you know,
Yeah.
you've built up this line of violation, you know that it comes out because it's like, you're not seeing me. Well, you didn't give them anything to see, often, so
So
you kind of have to take some responsibility.
So is
Yeah.
another way to say that, like, the fact that you're not expressing or sometimes even in
Mhm.
touch with your frustration is that that line of violation continues to get crossed, and there's a backlog that develops, and then at a certain
Yeah,
point, the
that's
straw that breaks the camel's back, and then there's the explosion. Or if maybe, well, yeah, and then there's the explosion.
that's the way I understand it. And
Sure.
I'm just to put this in perspective, so, because I don't want to get into specifics of people and stuff, but I've never been violent.
Hmm.
I'm not a violent person at all. So I mean, like
Hmm. Hmm.
exploding, I just mean like saying what I actually feel in the moment, and it's
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out possibly as yelling, or something, or
Yeah.
what I consider yelling to other people might not even consider. But it's like, it just feels like too much. It's like a flood of too much that the 9 has been feeling maybe for weeks or months, or who knows, and that's
Mhm.
kind of what it is. It's giving somebody back too much all at once, so they can't process it because the 9 hasn't been processing it. They're kind of shitting it back out in the world to help them process it, and then they're going to feel bad about it
I
and
see.
ruminate on that for the next 6 years in bed when they're going to sleep.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
One thing I'm struck with about our conversation and actually your conversational style is not just its somewhat meandering quality, but it's the volume of your voice stays relatively low and even as you're talking.
Wow.
And then every once in a while when you get animated about something, it becomes a little louder and you kind of come back to a resting point of
Wow.
like kind of
Yeah.
it seems like where you're at now.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that that's one clue. I think like if I were typing you, for example, from scratch, that would be a clue to me that you're a 9. But I'm curious if you have a relationship with the volume of your voice, or if that's too abstract a
I
question,
think I'm
or
often
where are you
unaware
at
of
with
it.
that?
Yeah, I think I'm
Okay.
often unaware of it. Um, when I'm allowing myself to get into something, or emotional, I guess maybe it's kind of, we're talking about the
Hmm.
thinking I'm yelling, or yeah, when I'm putting more inflection, maybe getting higher. That's kind of normal, it's what people do. But there's a way that I feel like I'm being too much, maybe, and then yeah, it's going to pull back down. But it's
Uh
instinctive. I'm not really sitting here thinking that,
huh.
processing that, like some people might
Hmm.
do. It's just more like, just go back to that equilibrium, that resting state, you know Yeah, I think it's more instinctive. It's like the way I talk. It's like that's where the meandering comes out. Is it's coming from the gut. It's a little slower, and I'm trying to put it into perspective, which means having to tie feelings or feelings and with thoughts and present it to you in real time somehow. That makes me
Mm-hmm.
meander because sometimes it's getting jumbled. What should be spoken and what should what's getting across the point and what's just having to make someone follow this trail. you know,
So
but
the meander,
yeah,
as I'm hearing you, it's kind of like the meandering is like you're sensing what context to provide or what would be useful to
yeah, too
say,
much usually. Yeah. Mhm.
and it's kind of like you're experiencing an inner swirl of all of that, and so you're kind of trying to verbalize it or track that in real time, and it just the verbal swirling mimics the inner swirling
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
certain sense. Yeah.
Right. And I think this plays more into having, being a social type as well. The nine's doing that because they're a gut type, and
Uh-huh.
ultimately the nine does want to be seen and connect, but a social type specifically, obviously, wants that. And so there's the way sometimes you're getting ahead of yourself with the anticipation of it, in a
Okay.
conversation,
Yeah.
anticipation of somebody
Yeah.
understanding you, and you're to get high off that kind of thing or something, and then you're starting to overshare. They got to pull up. We all learned to do this as we became adults, right? But that's essentially the feel of it. Thoughts are coming from some. This kind of way to describe it too. Because I kind of see the gut types as maybe the unconscious. I've heard this somewhere. I didn't come up with this, but the heart type is like the subconscious. The head type is like the conscious, right? Conscious has its place. It's like sequential problem solving, and the heart has its place. It's like the way you spread and tie together. In psychology, we learn this is also 20-something-year-old psychology, but we learn that you can't make a decision without the emotional parts of your brain functioning properly. So you literally
Mm-hmm.
can't decide what cereal to buy without
Uh-huh.
that.
Okay.
So
Sure.
that kind of does that balancing. And the gut is like this where the not the real you, but the animalistic or something, the essence of yourself on this planet. I don't want to get spiritual, like the essence or something. Something might get that confused with like spirituality, but like the core of you. And so I explain to my kids sometimes, like, where do you think thoughts come from, right? Sometimes you're laying
I
in their
love that
bed and
question.
these thoughts are just like blah 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 playing over, and they're coming from that. They're coming from this deep down up. You know what I mean? They're not just like um, and they seem random like dreams, but dreams essentially are doing the same thing. They're coming from something that your body, your mind, and thing are putting this thing together. And it may not make sense. I'm not a dream interpreter, or whatever necessarily, but there's a way that your body's using this to process, right, in your mind. Anyway, back to what I was saying, and here I got lost. Look, meandering too far. You're
Well,
letting me
we
go.
were
Sorry.
I
Yeah.
I was a little bit
I
actually,
hope it was
but I was
interesting.
curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we it's fascinating because we started
No.
with like a distinction about how your verbal swirling mimics an
Yes,
inner
that's it.
swirling,
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
and that was that was like couldn't have been a better demonstration of that.
Well, there you go. Right. I gave you the
Yeah.
logic of it and the example at the same time. But yeah,
Yeah.
but that's kind of it. These things are just bubbling up from somewhere. And then when you're trying to present yourself in a palatable format, like as a social type or whatever, or
Mhm.
make a connection, or it's any type of whatever you're trying to do, and me specifically in that
Mhm.
regard, be palatable, make the connection. There's a way that it all is like kind of meandering because you are trying to create this full context. You're trying to give them the flood of everything that led you to that or something.
Mhm.
Especially here talking about myself, this is a really strange thing for me. But so
Yeah,
I'm
I can
kind of
imagine.
like
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
A little unused to this, but usually when I'm talking to most folks, it's about work or about day to day.
I have a
How it is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you do you have any motivation to try to be less meandering or to be more concise?
Sometimes, if I
Or do
feel
you kind
it's
of not
annoying someone,
need it?
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Like if um I know in this I'm probably doing more than interrupting, but like in like a business call or something, the client, when they stop, like, oh, I was going too far into whatever, you know. So in those cases, yeah, but most of the time, no, I guess not. I mean, it does kind of create the story, right? If
Yeah.
somebody's actually listening, or if like they're actually listening, it's a nice way to vent. Maybe like getting a tattoo or smelling fruit. You know, it's a way to kind of connect.
Yeah.
If they're really listening, giving me proper feedback, and I'm not just annoying
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm just comparing like my experience of myself is that
them.
it's I'm in some way always monitoring how I'm communicating and especially
Yeah,
how
yeah.
my communication is landing on, especially as a 3. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
competence orientation to wanting the sentence that's coming out of my mouth to be as on the nose as possible
All right.
without too much,
Mm-hmm.
well, meandering, I guess.
Confusion,
And
right,
and
right.
so I had, yeah, so there's actually I experience a genuine inner motivation to be clear and
Mm-hmm.
pointed, and and I'm just struck by like what it seems that you're describing is for the most part like you don't have that motivation.
Right.
It seems like a kind of inner freedom around the way you're expressing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there is a relaxedness to it, right? And the ability,
A relax. That's there you go. A relaxedness.
yeah,
That's the word I was looking for.
because if you are really attuned to the control of it, you can't be really attuned to the control. Let's put it that way, to be relaxed. So I guess maybe I don't know if that's a 9-8 thing or something, but there or nine, but there's a way that you're going to have to kind of. I guess it's probably more of a 9-8 thing, yeah, because 9-1s do have that withdraw, pause to process it and present it more accurately as best they can, you know, according to their competence. But with me, and I would guess this is probably true for most 9-8s. Yeah, there's just not. It's just it's okay because if you're not focused, to be as calm and cool as 9-8 is trying to be all the time, and is half the time, right? Um, there just can't be that kind of attunement to frustration or meticulousness, you know. And I
So
have a
well said.
3
Yeah.
fixed, but it's the last one. So I definitely there's a way I want to be seen sometimes. Like I'm not really comfortable with this putting this blanket up here. I mean, you know, this camera. You know, there's a way that I kind of have, but I didn't allow myself to present that until now because we're talking about it. And I'm you know I'm wanting to show that I do have that. It's just it's not something that is going to be the first concern. You know what I mean? It's just like it's okay. This makes sense. This got it done. Josh is waiting for me. Let's put this up to block the light. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But it's like
Uh huh.
going with the flow. You know, it's going with the flow. So I guess what I'm trying to say in it. I think 9-8s in particular. I think I heard David say this one time that all three of the attachment types have this thing with being calm and cool. They think that's cool, but 9s, 8s, I think, are like the worst for this. They have this desire to be like, you're not going to affect me, and I'm not affected by you
Right.
when they are, because they're still pulling that
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff in. That's why they're having those deep holes in the type thing we are just talking about.
Yeah. The
Anyway,
nine wing
so
gate.
how are you going to be cool if you're worried about being too meticulous?
Totally. No, that makes
Or...
total sense to me.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
I've heard David say, I love how he says that the 8 wing on the gives the 9 permission to be as 9 as it wants to be. And there's like there's a kind of there's the 9 wing is both solid with the 8 wing but absorptive, like leading with absorption, but has like the solid barrier of the
yeah.
rejection object relation kind of
There's
open
a
and
way that it
closed at
goes
the same time.
two ways on that too. So like some types, and I forget who, maybe it is Reese and Hudson, called a 9-8 the referee. I've also heard it called the mountain. The mountain is what you're speaking to now. That kind of like, here's the
Hmm.
boundary. This is 9 land. That's your crazy shit land. You know, here's that boundary.
Hmm.
But then the referee, right? And I think this might even be more observable in a social type like me. Especially, imagine a scene like this: riding in a minivan with like 50 kids, like I've done so many times in my life, screaming and all the crazy stuff. And the wife's frustrated, not happy, and we're on some road trip. It's supposed to be fun. I'm on vacation, and I'm having to check emails because clients are emailing for some reason now. You might pick the day that they shouldn't be, whatever. And when the kid's poking or fighting the other one or hits the other one or something, the referee's popping it. There's this way that the 8 pops in when
Mm-hmm.
something is too much or something is infringing on their 9 land. Something crossed that wall, that boundary. That wall wasn't enough
Yes.
that day, or it didn't work that day. But now 8's popping out, and now it's asserting that autonomy into the world. It's asserting that control. And I used to think like, oh, I'm doing it for your best interest. You guys got to be chill. Quit being like that. Don't do that to your sister. But I had to realize through the Enneagram that instinct is me doing it for me initially. And I can, pull back and be the grown up, right? But that initial impulse, that's a selfish thing. So there is a way that also, um, the 8 gives the 9 permission to be as 9 as they want, but there's also a way that the 8 does protect the 9 somewhat too, right? As an act of protection, not just a defensive all the time. It's not that, a 9-8 is going out in the world asserting their autonomy or control. They are withdrawing and they're setting up that boundary. But occasionally that assertion does have to happen to protect that boundary. It's like sending the army across the castle wall to do something because the wall's not going to keep up with the turrets or something. So anyway, but
that was amazing. It's what's so cool, as meandering as sometimes you can be. You also have this capacity to be extremely clear about your type structure. I mean, that was extremely clear and well articulated what you just said. And
I appreciate that. It's
yeah,
been a good 5-6 years, whatever, in the making, trying to wrap my head around that stuff.
Sure.
Because this is so much deeper than your typical stuff like MBTI we were talking about. There is just so much more to it. And I know it's not necessarily scientific and all that, and I'm fine with that, But there's no personality typing is really, when you think about it. That's what I learned way back. It's like a lot of it is subjective, and it always will be. But the Enneagram, I know, and this is why you're probably into it, and I know it's why a lot of people I talk to are into it. It hits something deeper, than most personality systems do. Anyway, so I've just beaten this stuff up. So that's probably why sometimes I can pull out something that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I'm noticing the time, and I just want to check in with you if there's anything that we haven't covered that you definitely want to hit.
I don't think so. I think you've been a really, great talking partner, listener, and allowing me to kind of go off of my things without, and still kind of keep me in check. So no, I appreciate it. I think we did great. I think that's a good intro to what it's like to be this guy. So somewhat.
Yeah. What's this been like for you to be interviewed?
A little different. The only person I really talk like this to really like my kids or my wife, about stuff like this, or getting stuff most of the time. We're just, I'm friendly and, sociable in that way. I like to go out. I like to go out to eat a lot all the time just to get that little kind of social thing, but it's more just like pleasantries. I don't really get into too much deep stuff, so it's nice to kind of try to dive in. So that was fun. Great, unusual but great. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. Well, this is so cool. It's amazing how I love doing these interviews with people who have worked with the Enneagram and cultivated a sense of their interiority. And it's just amazing to hear you articulate with such clarity your inner experience of being a 9-wing 8. And so, I just really appreciate you being willing to.
That's the experience, though.
But that's that's kind of part of it. It's both.
That's exactly
it. It's the form and the content. It's not just.
That's
it's
why
both
we
what
said
you say
and how you say it.
I think
preparing would help because it's going to be some gut talk.
Yeah, that's right.
if we're doing this right. So.
Yeah, you were like, I was like, is there anything? Yeah, just to be clear, like for the listeners, we in our pre-show talk, I was like, do you want to prepare or anything? And you were like, no, I think I just want to do it how I do everything else, which is basically to wing it.
Yeah. So I do client presentations and everything.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate you, bud, and I really appreciate your stuff. And Well, I heard before we get off real quick, I heard that you're doing
Yeah.
that new Enneagram school. That sounds pretty cool. I think I went on your website, so I might check that out. Learning the centers, which are I learned this ass backwards, types first on the internet, like a lot of people do. And I really do think
Right.
that learning the centers has been my focus the past year or so, has really been helpful. Like I said, Alex's talk and just that kind of like putting this all into better perspective makes a lot more sense to me.
Sure.
But anyway, so I
Yeah.
saw
Well, we'd
that.
love to
That's
have you.
great. I might check it out. But yeah, appreciate you, man.
Thanks.
Appreciate what you're doing. Yep.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for doing this interview. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet, bud.